G'day again. In this video I want to talk about a concept called the Rapture, and it's an event that's supposed to happen in the end times prior to a period called the tribulation and the second coming of Jesus. And before I say anything, growing up in the church, often this subject caused a lot of anguish and anxiety amongst young people. And there's nothing to fear. The first thing I'd like to say is that if you seek God and you want to be close to God through Jesus, there's a promise where God will deliver. And there's a promise of eternal hope in John 3:16, for instance. It's just one example where God, when we commit to God through Jesus, we are His people, and He honours His people. So the rapture, it's a concept where, in a moment in time, Christians are raptured up prior to a period of time called the tribulation. And for what I read about the tribulation, which is mostly in the book of Revelation, it's going to be hell on earth, and we don't want to be there. And there are, Jesus said, even with His own return, we don't know the day or the hour. So I'm not saying in this video that it's going to happen on the 25th of September, on this year at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, I'm not saying that. But there are plenty of signs that it's close. And the signs have been getting closer and closer in all my 55 years. So, I don't know, there's some of the predictions about this in the Bible, some of the prophetic word in the Bible comes from the Old Testament and some of it from the New Testament. So in the book of Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 37, there's a passage that it describes a picture where there's a valley of dry bones and they are brought back to life, and then God brings back the people of Israel from the four corners of the world. Now, today, there is a state of Israel, that a country called Israel. It's the state of Israel, and it was put together. Came into being in the late 40s, and at the time when obviously, like a lot of countries, they have an inauguration ceremony where they initiate the country and install a head of government and a head of state. Sometimes that might be the same thing. But the first Prime Minister of Israel at that time, David Ben-Gurion, even he said that day was a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy in Ezekiel 37. Now, this prophecy in Ezekiel 37, there was a valley of dry bones, and they were brought back to life. So they were nearly extinct, and then they were brought back to rule themselves, right? So I actually think, when you look at the valley of dry bones being nearly dead, I actually think it's talking about the Holocaust, because the intention of the Germans in the 30s and 40s was to put them into they were going to be no more, extinct. That's what I was trying to say. And they even had a plan for a museum of an extinct people, for the Jewish people. And that didn't happen. And after the Second World War, when everything went back to normal, on the 14th of May, 1948, Israel became a nation again. And people have been coming back to Israel ever since. Now, a lot of people say that that was the beginning of what we call the end times. When you hear the end times, obviously when people are talking about the Bible teaching, this is what they're talking about. And Jesus said a lot of things too about the end times. He said in Mathew and in Luke, he said that time would be a time like Noah and a time like Lot. That was Abraham's son, who lived in Sodom, as in Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, he also said that a generation would see these things. Well, the Psalms say, in Psalm 90, that a person's life will be 70 years, 80 years with strength. And it's actually about 74 years since the creation of the state of Israel. So if it's going to happen, like a generation is a person's lifespan, and it's already at 74 years. So that'll give you an indication of how far we are. If the starting point was in 1948, then we're really well and truly into the end times. You might even say we're at the end of the end times. But he did say, Jesus, that the time would be like Lot and a time like Noah. Well, Noah and his family responded to God's call when the world was full of wickedness, and built a boat, and they hopped in that boat, and they were lifted above the flood waters when the flood came. So they were rescued because they responded to God. Now, Lot, when the angels who came to destroy the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they said to Lot, you need to run to the mountains, and when you get there, we can begin to destroy these. We can begin God's judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. And in that exchange, Lot expressed an opinion where he didn't think he could get to the mountains, so they let him go to the town of Zoar. But he had to get there first, right? So that's why I think that we've got to be raptured up first, because we're being rescued, and we've got to get to where we're out of this world so the tribulation period can take place. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't going to come to faith in God during the tribulation, because when we look at the book of Acts, the Jewish people as a people, there are plenty of Jews who are Christians, but the Jewish people essentially rejected the gospel. And this 7-year period will be a time when they get one last chance. And because some of the predictions are in the Old Testament and the New Testament, they will understand when because when they say they'll be taken up, suddenly there'll be no Christians in the world. And they're the one people who are going to realise that something's going on. And so they will come to faith, and then they will do what they were supposed to do in the book of Acts, and that is evangelise what's left. Now, if you hear what I just said, in 1948, so it's obviously not 70 years. That's when I say that, that period of time would be from the start of the end times to Jesus' return, and then 7 years before that, we get raptured up. So if we're at 74 years, it's not going to be 80, and then there's not 7 years left at the moment. Now, the interesting thing about that is, I'm pretty sure somewhere I saw that the average age of an Israeli citizen today is 82 years old. Yes. Yeah, life expectancy in Israel at the moment, according to Wikipedia, is 82.7 years. That's for male and female. It's a little younger for blokes, a little older for ladies. And if you add a couple of more years onto that, that means that maybe next year this could take place. But it could take place this year. The other thing that lines up with that is that some scholars have said that the 7-day time period that's in Genesis chapter 1 for the creation of earth, including a day of rest, is mimicked by somewhere else it says, to God 1,000 years is a day and a day is 1,000 years. Well, if you look at that 7-year time period and say a day for every 1,000 years for every day, that means that we're on and we look at that there would be 6,000 years from the creation of Adam to the creation to the return of Jesus. When Jesus does return, he will reign on earth for 1,000 years, right? But this 7 years before that, when we get raptured up, I know there's a lot to take in when you read. It's very complicated. And I must say, I feel like there's stuff being sort of talked about now that wasn't talked about when I was a kid. Particularly the bit about Lot and Noah. I don't remember that being said when I was a child. And so there's 6,000 years between the creation of Adam and the second coming, which means that there would be 2,000 years between the time of Christ and the second coming, right? Now, obviously, it's not his arrival, because it would have happened by now. It would have happened around the year 2000. So it must be about in the time of his death. Now so 2,000 years from the time of that is actually 2030, and you go 7 years back from that is 2023. So that's why I say it lines up with the life expectancy of a Israeli citizen now, and it lines up with 7 years before the rapture, that is, 7 years before the return of Christ. Now, the reason I bring Jesus' death into it, there are, in the book of Daniel, which is another thing Jesus talks about, there's a prediction about 70 weeks. Now, I don't know why they call them 70 weeks, because they're actually talking about 7 years. When they say a week, they mean 7 years. So there's been 69 prophetic weeks already taken place. I think from when Nehemiah went to rebuild the city or the wall, somewhere around there, and it finished. The scholars can say that it's spot on to the resurrection, the crucifixion, the 69th week. That means there's one more week, which is 7 years, and the tribulation just happens to be 7 years. So by the time that last 2,000 year period has happened, the 6th day will have finished. And the 7th 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 day will all the remaining Christians at the time have been raptured up. The Jews have had one last chance. God has incurred his wrath on the world. Jesus has come back to pass judgment, and then there's a day of rest. The people who come to faith in the tribulation, they get to reign. Their reward is to get to reign with Jesus for those 1,000 years. The people who, at the time, they get, I think they get a rest, but it's essentially a rest before we start eternity, where there's a promise of a new earth, new heaven and a new earth. And in the later part of Revelation, I like to think, God will be there with his people. So if we stay true to, if we commit to God, we follow God through Jesus and put our faith in him and follow him, everything that he did in Jesus' life on earth, all those promises, like in John 3:16, where it says, whoever believes in him, that is Jesus, will have eternal life. All those promises come true. And we will be with God, and we will be his people. What that really means is there's not much time left. But at the same time, on top of that, after everything I've said, I started this with Ezekiel 37. Ezekiel 38 and 39 talks about a war that has a coalition led by, when you look at the geographic area it's talking about now, it's called the Gog-Magog War. And they're almost, when you look at them, they're almost like bookends to this end time period. The Valley of Dry Bones started with the creation state of Israel, and then it ends with a war that leads into the tribulation period. And so that means, that this coalition that attacks Israel from the north, it has Syria in it, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Ukraine, or actually Crimea, and led by Russia, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Sudan, I think. They attack Israel from the north. And when you look at today, Russia has a very good coalition with Syria, and it has been helping Iran with their nuclear program. So it's just another, I could paint doom and gloom, but it is just another indicator that this is going to happen. But don't lose sight of this fact, that if we stay true to God, his promise is that we will be with him and we will be his people. That's the challenge for us today, is to continue to walk with God and don't be perturbed by what's happening around the world. There's a lot happening in the world, and God will see this through, and he will see his loyalty to us because we've shown obedience to him. He'll come through with that in the long run, believe me. My suggestion is that if this seems overwhelming, I would even watch this more than once and have a look at a guy called Jimmy Evans, Pastor Jimmy Evans on YouTube. He has a lot to say about this. But the world beyond this world that we get to live in if we follow Jesus is a glorious eternal future. Don't lose sight of that. Keep walking in faith, keep encouraging others to walk in faith, and God bless you in your walk. See you later.